Live.
Hello, everybody. We're going to let folks log on. I see lots of people logging on. Thank you for participating today. It's great. Great to see so many people having joined us. We'll just give it another minute or two as people log on. Just give it 1 or 2 more minutes. I see the number of participants still going up. Looks like people are continuing to join the webinar, so we'll just give it another minute or two as people log on.
What's that?
GAOA.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Still see that number of participants rising, so we'll hang on a little bit longer before we get started, just so everybody who wants to log in can see us from the beginning. Well, I see it's a couple of minutes after noon, so I think maybe we can go ahead and get started now. I'm Carl Silverstein with the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, and we really do appreciate y'all attending our Lunch and Learn today about the Great American Outdoors Act. We're thrilled for Jay Leutze, advisor to our board, former board member and board president. I think he served all the roles with SAHC, to be sharing his experience over the last, I think, 12 or 13 years, helping our nation fix a statute that is so important for conservation, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so this year we've had just a major achievement with that. Jay's going to share some of his personal experiences in that process, and then talk about some of the ways that that statute helps organizations like the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy achieve our mission. So I see people continuing to log on, but I think it probably makes sense to go ahead and turn it over to Jay. So thank you, Jay, for being with us. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off, but then maybe pop back in the future. So before Jay starts, just want to let folks know that if you have questions, you can type those into the Q&A or the chat, and then after Jay's given his presentation, we'll try to answer your questions. So thanks again for being with us today.
Thanks, Carl. Great. Well, this is exciting. It's a lot of fun. For me, I see a lot of names of dear friends and great supporters of SAHC, and folks from other partner organizations are included on the guest list here, and it's really wonderful to see. So let's celebrate a landmark conservation success. There have not been enough things to celebrate here lately, I feel, in our country for conservationists. So this certainly feels good to me, and I know to a lot of people out there who are used to using our public lands, either for recreation access or just as inspiration during this crisis, this global crisis that we're all living through right now. Knowing that these places are protected and are healing the land and healing us spiritually, I think is really important. And a lot of us have been reminded of that over and over since March, when we entered this COVID crisis. So I like to start a lot of my talks, maybe it's just for me, but I hope that you'll appreciate it too, with the wellspring of what inspires me. And so I have an image, I'm sharing my screen, I hope that you can all see it. This is the Appalachian Trail on Hump Mountain. And it's an image that was taken by my nephew, Travis Boardley. And Travis spends a lot of time outside, as most of you do, but he has a unique ability to capture things that I see, but he can interpret with his imagery what it feels like to be there. And this image captures, as well as any I've seen, what it feels like to me to be on Little Hump Mountain, looking across Bradley Gap, looking at Hump Mountain. And it inspires me that the footfalls of generations of conservationists have made this trail stand out the way that it does. It's a pretty healthy section of trail. It's not badly rutted, it's not badly eroded, but I love the way it shows up in this image. And whenever I need to get my batteries recharged, I go to Hump Mountain, I go to the Appalachian Trail, I retreat to the Rhone, to the highest elevations, and then I love to get down into the wet places, the creeks and the streams, whether I'm fishing or hiking or just rock hopping. And so the next image is another place that has fed me with inspiration as I've gone through this 12-year journey to enactment of the Great American Outdoors Act. This is Rocky Fork Creek in East Tennessee in Unicoi County. And this is really the project that introduced me to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Carl asked me if I had time when I was a member of the Land Protection Committee to go out and help analyze this property for its conservation value and walk it and take pictures and fish it, and really to create stories that we could tell to donors and partners and ultimately to members of Congress about the value of this 10,000 acre property. The 10,000 acres of forest feeds this one main stem of Rocky Fork Creek and makes it healthy. And there's nothing like standing in a watershed, the whole of which is imperiled with timbering and development. And this entire 10,000 acre drainage watershed was on the real estate market and had been under contract to a developer, and a slowing economy put that plan on hold, and SAHC was able to step in with the Conservation Fund and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and the Forest Service to secure this property for conservation. The only reason we were willing to do it is because we felt the story here was so strong that we could attract funding from the Congress. The price tag was $40 million. And we jumped off a huge cliff with the Conservation Fund and all these partners and closed on the property before we had 100% confidence that the Forest Service was going to be able to purchase it from us and from the Conservation Fund. That's what the Land and Water Conservation Fund was designed to do. Land and Water Conservation Fund was created in 1964 using offshore oil drilling mineral lease dollars, the royalties from those leases, to purchase public land and water. It was really an effort to address a crisis that members of Congress saw in the eastern United States initially. Members of Congress would fly into Washington, D.C., and they started to become alarmed over the sprawl along the eastern seaboard and said, you know, we're going to lose some of these sacred areas if we do not come up with a mechanism to finish unfinished parks, finish unfinished national forests. Land and Water Conservation Fund was that plan. Unfortunately, when they passed the legislation, they didn't have a way to fund it. And so there was subsequent legislation in 1978 to tie this mechanism to the drilling revenues and use a piece of it for permanent land and water conservation. And even then, the mechanism was not secured because it did not prevent the Congress and the appropriators in Congress from stealing money from this trust fund. And every year the Congress had been taking money from the Land and Water Conservation Fund at about 50% of its annual appropriation of $900 million. And that money was going to non-conservation purposes. So the Great American Outdoors Act, one part of it was to address that ability to steal money from this fund. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So here's part of the challenge. This is a map of Western North Carolina, and everything you see in red is a road, either a highway or a primary or a secondary road. What you see in green is our public lands network under permanent protection. So that usually means national forest, national park. You can see Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most contiguous piece of protected public land there on the North Carolina-Tennessee border where my cursor is. And even there's one road bisecting the park. This blob of red here represents the cross-section of roads in Asheville. So you can see the challenge to our public lands network. We have a lot of gravel roads within our national forest. Those fragment the habitat, make it really hard to have solid 100% conservation wins. Even in the places that look and feel protected, they can be imperiled. This is a good example just outside SAHC's service area, but it's a really nice example of the challenge we have in creating state parks, national forests. Everything you see in white is privately owned land. And what you see in green is publicly owned land as part of Elk Knob State Park. And then that kind of mustard color is conservation easement land. So lots of different ways to protect land, but in order to link this northern area of Elk Knob State Park with this southern area of the state park, we've got to buy, or the land trust there with partners have to buy all of these individual private pieces of land that would link this up. Now that's part of the goal, but we've got to have funding in place, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund is one source of funding for North Carolina's state parks. I won't wait for somebody to answer the question, but I pose it to you. Does anybody know what this is? This is Yuari National Forest. Yuari National Forest is a young forest compared to Pisgah or Nantahala National Forest. And I just want you to notice here in this slide how unfinished it is. Now, what does finishing it mean? It means linking up these areas of private land within the proclamation boundary of the National Forest. This is a really good case of a forest that's a long way from being finished. The public only owns 26% of it, but the public only owns about 60% of Pisgah National Forest. And the challenges are the same in Pisgah National Forest in trying to link up sections of protected land with other sections of protected land. So I use the word proclamation boundary. This is Yuari National Forest proclamation boundary. That means everything within here can be added to Yuari National Forest. As conservationists, we have to wait for willing sellers to want to sell their land to add to the forest. And then we have to try to get a partnership together to give the land trust the confidence that the Congress will show up and do their part and help us pay off loans that land trusts need to take if we're going to lead on projects. So you can see the amount of work left to do in a unit like Yuari National Forest. Here's Pisgah National Forest. These are the different units of Pisgah National Forest, the different ranger districts. Roan Mountain, where I showed the picture of Hump Mountain, is right here. And you can see there's not a lot of protected land in green in this district ranger district here of Pisgah National Forest. Look at all this private land. All that could be added to Pisgah National Forest, and I hope in the next 200 years it will be. A lot of it. At least I'd like all these areas to link up so that wildlife has meaningful corridors to travel and that hikers do as well, and people who hunt and fish and camp and paddle. We've got to fill in more of this proclamation boundary in the vicinity of Grandfather Mountain, for example, and all along this Appalachian Trail corridor, which is the Tennessee-North Carolina state line. So we have a lot of work to do, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund is the primary source of funding. So it's really important that we fixed it. So as a lobbyist, as an advocate, this is what we take with us to Washington, D.C. when we want to influence a member of Congress. We took Congressman McHenry a map of his own district, as outlined in red, and showed him all the places in his district that had been funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. A lot of you have some familiarity with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. A lot of members of Congress don't. So we've got a lot of storytelling that we have to do. And it surprises a lot of members of Congress that their local ball field, like Jefferson Park or Shelby City Park, all those are funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. In addition to up here, the Blue Ridge Parkway is a funded unit. This is Mount Mitchell up here. So Congressman McHenry, his district used to come up to the summit of Mount Mitchell, or at least to the Parkway corridor. But also Charlie Owen Park, and military battlefields and greenways and bike trails and local swimming pools, all are funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which made it all the more important that we fix this broken mechanism that allowed for the diversion of funds. This was a very effective tool that we used. And SAHC created that map. Jamie Irvin, who was a AmeriCorps member for SAHC, created that map. And advocates from SAHC traveled to Washington, D.C. and made the case to Congressman McHenry. And this is the map that Jamie made in this office to influence Congressman Rowe and to educate him about the needs in Cherokee National Forest, which is this very fragmented green unit along the border, very long, spread out unit, and also all the local parks in his district that we used to turn him into a pretty good champion for the program. Congressman McHenry was an outstanding champion for the program. He really, he signed up every time there was a bill to hop on as a co-sponsor. Congressman Rowe didn't feel quite the same way about funding mechanisms, and he came in as a fiscal conservative in the Tea Party wave and was harder to convince that this was a good use of dollars, but he's an avid hiker. And we would see him on the trail and see him outside. So he always supported projects that came up in his district and signed letters of support for the projects. So we would take members where we would meet them where we could. And with Congressman Rowe, it was on the trail. Zooming out a little bit, this shows you the southeastern United States and how much federal land ownership there is. And I use this slide to highlight that here in the Southern Appalachians, we have a great network of public land to build on. This is just federal ownership. It doesn't show conservation easements that SAHC has completed or Foothills Conservancy has completed or Mainspring or Conserving Carolina or Blue Ridge, all the, the mountain land trusts or the Nature Conservancy. But all those flesh out this network of public lands. We have a very good backbone to start with here. And I think that may be why this region created so many advocates for the public lands that had a real impact in the conversation in Washington, D.C. that was unfolding. So we had advocates across the country that were similarly situated. Fans of the Pacific Crest Trail celebrated last year this acquisition of these so-called checkerboard pieces on the map that are going to enable a much better hiking experience for the Pacific Crest Trail. And all of this was funded with private dollars matching federal dollars through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I use this slide just to showcase the challenges of knitting together public lands so that people can use the network and so that animals and other species can use the network. But this is what the Land and Water Conservation Fund was designed to do, to solve problems, to be one part of a big toolkit for creating a national network of public lands. So it's very different in the East than it is in the West. This map takes each state and uses a graphic to show how much of that state is in federal ownership. In the East, you can see not a lot of the states, not a very large percentage of each state is made up by federal land, whereas in the West, which was settled under a completely different pattern, the federal government owned all the land and then distributed land out to the states once they were created as states. And so you have a lot of federal ownership in the West. What that means politically is that in the East, you had a lot of members of Congress who understood the challenge of finishing public land units, whereas in the West, you have a lot of members who are being responsive to their constituents feel like the federal government already owns a lot of land, and why would we need to buy more? Well, of course, you all know from looking at the maps we've already seen that public land doesn't come with these neat borders. Even out west, they're filling in these holes like you saw on the checkerboard. And so our coalition spent a lot of time explaining to Western members how important Land and Water Conservation Fund was to unlocking land that the public already owns but might not have good access to. So members in the Idaho delegation may say, we've got enough federal land, but trust me, they're in there swinging every year for appropriations to open up better habitat for elk hunting or to get better access to trout streams for the hunting and fishing public. So it looks like a very different situation, but the stories are actually quite similar. So here's what Rocky Fork, the project I talked about early on, looked like on the map, and you can see the challenge. This is the North Carolina line, which has also got the Appalachian Trail right along it. And then here you've got 9,600 acres, and the price tag, as I said, was $40 million. It took us 7 years to raise the congressional appropriations to purchase Rocky Fork. And during that time, the Conservation Fund had to hold that land. They basically borrowed money from their own organization, and SAHC, as an advocacy partner, spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. seeking these appropriations. Thank goodness Senator Alexander was very in favor of the project. The local congressman was not in favor of federal funding for land conservation. So he would tell you privately that he wanted it protected, but he couldn't put his name on it because that would be unpopular back home with the constituents. Well, of course, he was wrong, and this project turned out to be very popular back home. And nationally, this became the #1 ranked project for addition to a national forest in the country. So it started out being ranked very high regionally, and then it became the #1 project nationally, and it really gave Senator Alexander a lot of authority as our bills were moving through Congress, because he had skin in the game back home in Tennessee. Another champion I would like to point out is Richard Burr, North Carolina Senator Richard Burr. This is a day that he agreed to come out into the landscape in the Roan Highlands and learn about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. He was offended that the mechanism was broken. He thought that was a sign of a broken Congress, and he came at it from a good government angle. He also likes to fly fish, so he accepted an invitation to come to the Roan Highlands, and a group of us partners from the Nature Conservancy and Piedmont Land Conservancy, where he's a member, and Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy hosted him and his wife. They came out and we spent a day at leisure in the Roan, just like a lot of you have had. And the first time you came to the Roan, it may have changed your life. Well, I think it changed his life. This became his Christmas card, and he asked us, leaving the TNC preserve on Big Yellow Mountain that SAHC and TNC co-manage, what do you need from me? And we were very frank, and we said, Senator, we need more Republicans to support this program. We have every Democrat in the Senate and the House in support. And he said, well, how many Republicans do you have? And we said, 1, Lamar Alexander. And he said, well, now you have 2. So we worked closely with Senator Burr's office, and he crafted legislation to fix the program. And he told us we'd need a rifle shot at midnight to attach the legislation to another bill. You typically are looking for a must-pass bill, like the Defense Authorization Act. You know it's going to pass, and if you can be amended into that legislation, you can take a ride with it. And we all thought that was our best hope for getting this taken care of, because in terms of the federal budget, LWCF is not a huge piece of it. So as a small fish, we wanted to get attached to a larger piece of legislation. And we went through this exercise for many, many years until this year. And I'll tell you how we shifted strategy in a minute. But I want to thank Senator Burr and his wife for becoming ambassadors for the program. And how could you not? When you stand on Big Yellow Mountain, when you stand on the summits of the Highlands of the Roan and you see the Appalachian Trail, you can not only see the beauty, you can see the threat that comes from road building and the threat that comes from ridgeline development. and it turns people into champions. So I think everyone who has taken the effort to show up for this call is already either a champion or a champion in waiting. And we certainly need more people to tell our stories with us. So, so thanks for showing up. Part of having influence with a member of Congress is getting to know their staff. And so this is Matt Dockham and his wife Kelly, who came fishing with us one day on a piece of property that we hoped to protect with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We weren't able to because the fund, it was so diminished by this annual theft. So, but we had a great day out in the field with Matt and his wife, and they went home telling stories, and they were able to buttress the case that the senator was making with other staff on Capitol Hill. That's how this often happens. This is a day out with Senator Burr's chief of staff, Natasha Hickson, and her son and husband, and we picked carrots at a neighbor of mine's garden. A former SAHC board chair, actually, Whit Langstaff, let us pick carrots from his garden and play around in his pond after taking a hike over to the Appalachian Trail. And that's my colleague, Tom Kors from the Nature Conservancy. So much of advocacy is getting to know people on a personal level, finding your shared interests, and demystifying some of the political crud that accrues on Capitol Hill. Sometimes you got to get out in the field to create relationships that can really help you. Sometimes you bring folks out into the field. Sometimes you go to their venue. So this is Matt Moses, SAHC trustee and superhero, came to Washington with me. We've had several SAHC members over the years, board members included, come to Washington, and this is taking the train between the Senate and the House underground beneath the Capitol. Matt did just a great job of talking about USA Raft as a thriving business whose business is really built around access to public land, because his rafting trips through the through the Nolichucky Gorge, they travel between Cherokee National Forest and Pisgah National Forest, and people have an amazing experience, and they want to know what they can do to protect more land and water, and Matt's a great storyteller. This is Senator Burr's car. It's a Thing. He parks it underground if the weather is bad, but part of being a good advocate is becoming a spy and a sleuth and a snoop. And so it's not hard to know when Senator Burr is in his office in the Russell Building versus when he's over in the Capitol. And so this was just kind of a funny image that I captured one day. We don't only advocate with members of Congress, we also advocate with heads of agencies. This is Sally Jewell, the prior Secretary of the Interior in the Obama administration. She agreed to come hike a section of the Appalachian Trail. There's Morgan Somerville from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and Tom from the Nature Conservancy. And Sally Jewell had been the CEO of REI, so she knew a lot about outdoor recreation when she came into the position, and was just a great Secretary of the Interior and really wanted to fix the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so on that same hike, we invited Senator Burr to join, and he did, and formed a unique bipartisan, just a feel-good relationship with the Secretary of the Interior. And this relationship really paid off as we moved towards permanently authorizing this program and ultimately fixing the broken funding mechanism. And it's just nice to see people outside, not arguing and not in their bunkers, but finding common purpose. So this was a really good day. So what we asked members of Congress to do is show different ways to support the project. This is a support letter from Tennessee, members of the Tennessee congressional delegation. You have senators and House members here supporting the program. So you not only need to be bipartisan, you need to be bicameral. You have to have support in the House and the Senate. And this is a good example of members in both houses of Congress supporting projects, no matter how they feel ideologically about federal dollars flowing. This is a celebration ceremony. There's there's Carl, Senator Alexander, Congressman Rowe, myself, the day Rocky Fork State Park was opened. And this was the unveiling ceremony. They both helped in various ways. And Rocky Fork State Park is now named Lamar Alexander Rocky Fork State Park. And he deserves that honor. He really worked hard on the project. And you'll notice part of it is a state park. A lot of it is now Cherokee National Forest. All of it is open to the public now after being held by a timber investment trust and under contract to a gated development. So when you talk to different members of Congress, you have to, as I said earlier, you got to sort of meet them where they are. Some want to hear about the spiritual experience of dark skies and seeing constellations, kids seeing constellations for the first time when you take them out of the cities and suburbs and into the Rhone. And some members need to hear about the economic advantages of outdoor recreation and land conservation. So this is a slide that we've used to, I think, really tell a story that is underreported. Outdoor recreation is a massive industry. It creates a lot of jobs. As an industry, it is twice as big as pharmaceuticals. And if any of you have ever picked up the Wall Street Journal when you're on a flight, some of you may subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. You've never seen it on the front page of the paper. You see pharmaceuticals all the time, and outdoor recreation is bigger. So I believe as an advocate that we have got to tell our story very effectively so that members of Congress realize that we have real weight and we need to start pushing it around, to be frank. I think we owe it to the things we love, conservation and outdoor experiences, to tell the story in the most effective way. And we all need to be aware of statistics like this that show the weight of outdoor recreation as an industry. So looking at the map again, I wanted to highlight a couple of projects that SAHC has underway. Some of these are in the process of transfer right now to a federal agency. This is a map of the Highlands of Rhone, and this sort of north-south axis here shows in red the Appalachian Trail as it flows through the Rhone Highlands. Everything you see in dark green is federal land, either Cherokee National Forest or Pisgah National Forest. What you see in brown here is owned by North Carolina State Parks. These are properties that SAHC and here on the Rhine tract on Little Yellow Mountain, TNC, purchased, and then we transfer those to the state of North Carolina. They can use Land and Water Conservation funding to transfer those into the agency ownership from us. And then what's in blue are properties that SAHC has purchased and we own and we manage as preserves, depending on what the specific needs are and what our management planning shows us. Up here to the left, Tiger Creek, this property, that's a classic in-holding in Cherokee National Forest. And we've got some data here on the map showing the conservation importance of this landscape. And then there was a willing seller here. So this is going to be added to Cherokee National Forest using Land and Water Conservation Fund. And moving forward, here's another one, Dahl Branch. The colors are different on this map, but it represents things you just saw. This is the Appalachian Trail in white now on this map. And this is Hampton Creek Cove State Natural Area that SAHC purchased and conveyed to the state of Tennessee. This is Roan Mountain State Park, many of you are familiar with. This is Dahl Branch. And look at how close it is to the Appalachian Trail on Hump Mountain, which is where the first slide that I took was taken. So now I'm going to ask Carl to discuss two projects, and then I'll wrap up by telling you a little bit about the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act.
Thanks, Jay. This is a pair of acquisitions that we just purchased, and they kind of go together. And so the first one on the map there is Tennessee Ridge, and we're really proud to have been able to have done these. And there's no way that we could have purchased these properties if we hadn't have known that there would be a source of LWCF funds that would enable the Forest Service to buy these from us. So The first one that you see there in red is called Tennessee Ridge. And this is the Jackson County, Transylvania County line in North Carolina. And Panthertown Valley is is part of the green that's already owned by the Nantahala National Forest. The area that you see there in blue is a large conservation easement that SAHC holds. So a couple of SAHC members learned that the owner of this tract and the one that you'll see next, they're both owned by the same person, was ready to sell them, and really wanted to kind of accomplish that as soon as he could. Um, this tract and the other were priorities for conservation organizations going back decades, really, but just had not been able to strike a deal. So when we learned that this track was available and the other one that you'll see next, we really felt compelled to make it work and figure out a solution for SHC to buy these properties and hold them until the Forest Service could purchase them from us and add them to the Nantahala National Forest. So Jay forwarded to the next map there, and you'll see in red the other tract that was part of this pair. This one's called Big Creek, and that is located not too far from Highlands. Um, and this is the North Carolina Georgia state line there that Jay's cursor is pointing to. And this property, uh, while it's in North Carolina, it is a headwater tributary of the Chattooga Wild and Scenic National River that flows through Georgia, a beloved site, really nationally significant. And you can see how this property fits in almost like a finger into the Nantahala National Forest, and then it also adjoins the Chattahoochee to the south across the state line in Georgia. So like I said, the owner really wanted to go ahead and sell these properties, and had they gone on the open real estate market, especially in the pandemic when people from large cities are looking for a retreat in the mountains. I think that there would have been a very high risk that somebody from Atlanta or a developer might have bought this property and then turned it into potentially a gated community. And so we felt really that we needed to move quickly to be able to buy the property. So this land isn't inexpensive land, and SHC had success in raising about half the purchase price for these two properties from private philanthropists donating funds, committing funds to a seed money to enable us to purchase them and hold them until the National Forest could acquire them from us. But we had to take out loans, well over $1 million in loans, really approaching $2 million. And in order to do that, we will have the courage and the fortitude to borrow money to acquire tracts of land, to hold them for the public benefit. But in order to do that, we need to have a mapped out strategy that how we will pay that loan back. For one thing, the conservation-based lenders who give us loans to do this kind of work won't lend us the money unless we can explain to them our strategy and our plan for selling the property to a public agency and then using the proceeds of that sale to pay back the loan. Luckily, we were able to do that in both of these cases for this pair of acquisitions purchased within the last couple of months. And our strategy is to hold them and to work with the Nantahala National Forest to apply some of these dollars through the Great American Outdoors Act and the Land Water Conservation Fund so that the Forest Service can buy the tracts from us. So it's just a great example of how relevant the passage of this law is, and we're grateful to Jay for having worked on this for 12 years and everybody who's really made it happen. And we are utilizing the funds right away, and there'll be more to come, as you know.
Yeah, I think just to highlight the risk involved here, when we reached out to the Forest Service and we explained that we had this opportunity, they were very, very excited about it because generations of conservationists have wanted to tackle this pair of projects. And now we had this opportunity, and the Forest Service told us that given Land and Water Conservation Fund funding cycles, we should be prepared to hold the properties until 2025. Now, that was the initial indication from the Forest Service, and that just highlights how much risk we've been living with. So we would be paying interest all those years on the loans that we take. And so it's really important to us institutionally to have the Land and Water Conservation Fund fixed and permanent and well-funded, and we hope to be able to pay those loans off sooner than that now, that the fund will roughly double next year off of its $495 million last year, which was a reduction from $900 million. With the full $900 million, we feel like we can get a lot of great work done. We're really excited about coming at projects with confidence and being able to be very selective about the projects that we choose, but with that confidence that we'll be able to be taken out. So real quick, how did this happen? We had all this goodwill. We've got all these amazing projects. We've got all these great advocates going to Washington. Well, I'll go back to that map of the West versus the East. And when Richard Burr and Lamar Alexander signed on as champions for the program, a lot of people in the administration dismissed it as, well, we get it. The East is very different. The public lands are very fragmented. You don't have any Westerners. Well, we had a really unique situation where the staffer who handled public lands in Lamar Alexander's office took a new job about 4 years ago with a freshman senator, Cory Gardner. I guess it was exactly 6 years ago. And Cory Gardner is a senator from Colorado. Well, all of a sudden he had a staffer who really understood the Land and Water Conservation Fund well. And within about a year, Cory Gardner started talking about the Land and Water Conservation Fund in public the way he had as a House member when he had actually been a staff member for a congressman in Colorado and had worked on an LWCF project at the time. And Great Sand Dunes National Park is his favorite place in the country, which is funded by the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So we started telling stories with his office. Critically, he sat on the Senate Energy Committee, and as did Senator Lamar Alexander, and as did Martin Heinrich, a Democrat from New Mexico, and some other longtime champions of the program. And they overcame some opposition from their chair, Lisa Murkowski, and started talking in a much more positive way about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, as did a member from Montana who was getting a lot of pressure from hunting and fishing groups in Montana that said, we want more public land. So the story broadened, starting in North Carolina and Tennessee to the west, and soon it became clear that we had a lot of momentum. And when there's a shift in the House composition, we had a very negative chair of the Natural Resources Committee in the House, Rob Bishop from Utah, no fan of public land, no fan of public agencies. And when the Democrats took the House of Representatives, Rob Bishop was no longer the chair. Raul Grijalva became the chair of that committee, and he loves the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So we had a different composition of the House. We had a lot of support from both parties in the Senate. What we didn't have yet was support from the administration. The Trump administration had zeroed out this fund every year in their budget. And that was very dismaying to a lot of us because it meant we couldn't plan. We couldn't take risks like this if the president's budget was always going to request zero for this program. All of that changed when some members in the Republican Party went to the president and said, you know what, this is really good for me back home. This project means a lot to people on the ground. And after a lot of work from Democrats and Republicans, the president tweeted in favor of the program back in March. And this gave cover to some moderate Republicans to support the program who had been silent heretofore. And so it began to look like we had an opportunity. but we still had to marry a lot of different interests together, and there wasn't a big vehicle to attach ourselves to with an amendment. And so a plan was hatched by several members of the Senate initially to create a standalone bill. And it wasn't just a Land and Water Conservation Fund bill. It included parks maintenance, which is an effort to fund areas that are really falling into disrepair in national parks. And then Lamar Alexander worked very hard to expand that to national forests and refuges as well. And all of a sudden you had all this support from the Democratic Party already, and you had new support from the West. And the president then signaled his support. And so all of a sudden we were cooking with gas. And this is Curtis Swagger. I told you about Curtis. He worked for Senator Lamar Alexander, and then he worked for Cory Gardner. And Curtis really helped engineer this win. He's a wonderful guy, and I've known him for years and years. And he's a go-to guy when you've got questions about what's going to happen to the Western delegation. And I think he uses what he learned from Senator Alexander's office very well. And we have had a couple of distance celebrations with the staff from Senator Alexander's office and Senator Gardner's office, Senator Burr's office. And I want to mention David Price, a Democrat from North Carolina. When I told you that there was not support from the local congressman for Rocky Fork in public initially, Congressman David Price was born next to Rocky Fork. And then when he grew up, he lived in North Carolina and became a congressman representing Durham and the Chapel Hill area. And he went to that Tennessee congressman and he said, it's very unusual to support a project out of district, but I want to submit appropriations requests on behalf of Rocky Fork if you will let me. And they struck an agreement. And so you had Republican Senator Lamar Alexander and Democrat House member David Price putting in appropriations requests, and that's how Rocky Fork got funded. The federal side, the private side, we raised $6 million privately to match $34 million in federal dollars. So it really has been an amazing journey. I've learned a lot about human nature. I've learned a lot about politics and learned a lot about setting ideology aside. And I've learned a lot about using the moment. This was a unique moment in time when, had the House of Representatives gone first and passed the Great American Outdoors Act, I doubt the Senate would have taken it up because it would have been too political. And the Republicans in the Senate wouldn't have wanted, or the administration wouldn't have wanted to give Nancy Pelosi a win. Because the bill started in the Senate using a House shell, which meant they got around the revenue issue. Revenue bills have to start in the House. The Senate passed it. The House stuck to their guns and wanted it passed, even if it originated with a Senate proposal that made Mitch McConnell look good. Everybody set that aside because this was the right thing to do for the country, and certainly the right thing to do for North Carolina and Tennessee and our landscape in Western North Carolina. So that's a long story boiled down. I'm happy to answer any questions. Questions I can't answer, I bet Carl can.
Well, we are getting some great questions in, and I just want to thank each of you for participating in this webinar today. We have 70 folks who've joined this, and it just means a lot. Looking through the list of you who've logged on, seeing so many names of folks who love SHC, and we love working with you. And this pandemic has made it impossible for us to get together in person. And so it does really mean a lot that we can have these kind of educational opportunities and for you to seize them and join us for them. So thank you. SHC is going to continue to host lunch and learn type webinars over the coming months, and we'll hope you will join us for those too. As has been said, we've recorded this and we will post it on Appalachian.org videos. So if you want to check it out or share it with a friend, please do that. We do have some questions and can share those with Jay. Some of these relate to the politics, and so it really may be that you know the most about that. We've had a question about Rob Bishop and the stance about the 100th meridian and whether there's going to be follow-up on that. So
that's a great question. So there has been guidance that LWCF, I talked about how it originated to address this problem in the East, and Westerners sort of took that as gospel and said, yeah, if you want to create a program to protect land in the East, let's say that 85% of it, 85% of the land protected should fall east of the 100th meridian. Well, that sounds kind of okay unless you're in California or Oregon or Idaho, and I just have to laugh at all the very conservative members of Western delegations who have begged for these funds over the years to improve access for hunting and fishing and boating and camping, and so it's never realistic that it was going to be enforced that way, and the agency certainly didn't interpret the guidance that they had to apply this 85-15 structure because appropriators retain control, and appropriators were making requests for funds much higher than 15% in Western states. And since appropriators retain the control, the agency is sort of at their working at their behest. And if there's anything appropriators don't like to give up, it's control over funding. So the agency interpreted those requests to mean that that was kind of a meaningless piece of guidance, and so it's not included in the Great American Outdoors Act.
thanks, Jay. We also had a question of whether there's resources out there where folks who've joined the webinar today might be able to learn more about the Great American Outdoors Act.
Yes. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition has a website, LWCFcoalition.com. And it's got a fact sheet for every state. If you'll scroll down, you can see projects that have been completed in each state. You can see dollar amounts. And then all the press materials are there and lots of information at LWCFcoalition.com.
Great, thanks. We had one more question that I'd like to talk with you about, which is whether, in what ways the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act may enable more acquisitions by the National Forest, whether the pace of those may increase, whether the National Forest might be able to do projects that they heretofore haven't been able to focus on, or whether the competition for the funds will be so intense that it'll still be as challenging to get things done.
That's a great question. I think competition is good. It's healthy in this regard. The more we show need, I mentioned that this $900 million a year mark was set in 1978. Adjusted for inflation, that would be $3.2 billion a year. So we've fallen behind even with locking in the funds and making them mandatory at this point. So there is more work to do, and you've seen how much work, just looking at Pisgah National Forest as an example. And the forest in North Carolina want to do projects in Yuari National Forest and the Nantahala and the Croatan and Pisgah. So there will continue to be competition among units and among agencies. So I'm hoping that that conversation and that competition drives, it highlights over the next several years the need to maybe inflation adjust LWCF so that we can try to keep up with rising land values. The short answer is we will be able to do more. The agencies will be able to do more. But a lot of people who've never applied for Land and Water Conservation Fund funding in the past are now going to be inspired to apply for Land and Water Conservation Fund funding. So I expect a lot of competition for the dollars, and we've just got to, as advocates and folks with projects that are hanging in the balance, we've got to tell our best stories and make sure that that we win some of those competitions and steer money to the most important projects. It will continue to be critical that we use conservation planning to, the funds will be scarce, so we still have to be very strategic and make sure that we are going after the right tracts of land, not just any tract of land inside the proclamation boundary, but the tracts of land that are really going to make the conservation needle move.
Thanks for that. We also have a question about maintenance needs and the millions of dollars of maintenance needs for the Smokies and the Blue Ridge Parkway, and how will money flow? How soon will we see a difference there?
So unlike Land and Water Conservation Fund, which gets a permanent fix, the funding is made mandatory forever. The maintenance side of the Great American Outdoors Act runs for 5 years. So it supercharges the effort on fixing maintenance problems. And that can be broken railings and visitor centers along the Blue Ridge Parkway, areas that have had to be closed because they can't open safely because shingles are falling off of a roof, or bathrooms that are closed. Those are critical needs, and it ties into the LWCF story because some members have been reluctant to buy more land in these units until we can take care of what we have. So we think this is a pretty rational response to taking care of what we already have and proving that that we can add land within these units and be responsible about that. So because there's a 5-year funding window, I expect the jobs that are shovel ready are going to move quickly, and that money has to be spent during the period that the dollars are flowing. So I would expect to see a rapid ramp up of addressing maintenance concerns in our parks and other public lands.
Great. We have one more question about how to get more connected with ongoing efforts. And so I'm going to type appalachian.org into the panel there, because I do think that may be the best way. If anybody wants to send me their email, then I'll make sure that you get added to our list of alerts, and my email address I'm going to just type there into the field. I see we're coming up on an hour, and so want to be respectful of everybody's time. And if there are not more questions, I think we'll probably go ahead and wrap up. But again, I want to thank everybody who's participated today, and especially Jay, thank you for your years of leadership and work on this topic and on so many things related to conservation in the Southern Appalachians and in the whole country. We really wouldn't have been able to accomplish this without you. And thanks for coming here today to explain it so clearly and succinctly. So we'll be having more SAHC Lunch and Learn webinars, and we hope you'll join us for those. And till then, I just want to say thank you. And we really do appreciate everybody's interest. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.